Welcome back. The recent cattle industry convention and NCBA trade show in Nashville had it all. Important policy decisions, producer education, networking, and a whole lot of fun. Russell Nemitz caught up with one of the great speakers from this year's event. Hi, Russell.
Thank you, Kevin. And of course, one of the highlights here at the Cattle Industry Convention every year for attendees is having the chance to hear renowned speakers talk about issues and other things that are impacting their industry and, of course, their farms and ranches back home. And in Nashville, one of the speakers was Glenn Tonser with Kansas State University's Economic Department. And I guess first, tell us what your presentation was all about here in Music City this year.
Sure. The purpose of my being here this year was to convey the results from a recent beef demand focus project. Specifically, myself and Ted Schroeder, also at K-State, worked on a project trying to explore if we can monitor and measure beef demand differently than we've done in the past.
You know, I guess for folks at home now, maybe just give us your perspective on where this market and how the beef demand equation all fits in.
Sure. Well, the market's complicated, as everybody understands, and at the end of the day, supply and demand drive the prices we observe in this industry. Leading up through 2014, both supply and demand were supportive, and then since then, we've actually had some, particularly in 2016, some weakness on beef demand and growing supplies. So a really long way of telling you that both supply and demand are massively impacting this marketplace.
Of course, producers are really watching their operating costs very closely in these times of uncertainty, if you will. Certainly we're off the market highs. You know, what's your advice for them on watching those input costs, controlling them, but still being able to maintain a viable farming and ranching operation?
Yeah, there's not a simple answer to that, but some of the work we've done at K-State finds that you have a lot less influence on the price you receive, in this case cattle price, than you do your input cost. So there's more opportunity to reduce costs than there is to maximize output price. And if you accept that, then actually I'm encouraging people to focus on their cost of running their business. And in particular, there's more variation in returns across people that are, cow-calf sector that is, that's driven by cost structure than there is on revenue variation. So if you can get more efficient, if you can reduce your labor cost per cow, right, or per steer at the feeder level, whatever level we're talking about, or your feed cost per unit, you stand a much better chance. How you do that varies a lot around this country, right? So I'm from Kansas. There's now folks that are feeding wheat that maybe didn't in the past. That's an example of taking advantage of an opportunity to use maybe a feed stuff we didn't before in response to lots of wheat being around, right? So as you go around the countryside, those opportunities vary, but regardless of where you're listening to this from, I encourage you to do something maybe a little different than you've done in the past as a way to get those per unit costs down, because obviously your output prices have come down notably over the last 18 months.
Obviously, you folks at Kansas State University work with a lot of producers, not just from Kansas, but across America. I mean, in relation to what you've just told me today, I mean, what are some of the things they're feeding back to you?
Well, several of the issues they're feeding back is the question about whether we've stopped herd expansion. So the cattle inventory reports recently come out. We won't belabor that here today. But in balance, there's growing questions about, have we stopped growing the herd? Should I personally continue to expand my herd? Those kind of things we hear a lot about. There's lots of discussion about the role of trade, right? Is that one of the reasons prices have come down or not? I'm happy to discuss that more if you want. That's a long answer to that. Exports are very good. Imports, I don't think, are the reason that prices are lower, would be the punchline of that. And the key part of that is we export very different products than we import. Most of us at face value recognize there's a very diverse set of products that come off a given animal. Some of those products have higher value outside the U.S. than they do inside the U.S. That's why we export. But there's also things like ground beef that we're a big fan of here in the U.S. that we can benefit by importing some pounds from elsewhere to enable us to produce more pounds of ground beef. So in a long answer to that is trade allows us to be more specialized and use all the different products coming off that carcass in a way that adds value to the total carcass. And it all gets down to diverse products that frankly needs to be appreciated more throughout the industry.
That's a great answer, because all these different parts of this big equation that make the beef cattle industry here in America successful have variable parts, obviously. And for young people, what's your advice in times like these?
Continue to come to meetings. It doesn't have to be only the annual NCBA meeting, of course, but your local ones, the national ones, do your best to be educated. Listen to wise people that have been through challenges before, right? Myself and people younger than me may not have seen the current challenges, but other generations have, so they have some lessons we should listen to. And moreover, be willing to adjust to survive. So I used the example earlier about using wheat in your ration. Maybe you haven't before. The specific opportunity is going to vary depending on the operation, but don't just run the operation in 2017 the way you did in 2016 just because that's what we did, right? Be open to tweak the process a little bit. Feed ration adjustments and those kind of things are kind of no-brainers to explore.
Any final thoughts before I let you go? Maybe summarize what we just talked about again as far as overall market outlook and just beef demand in general?
Yeah, just in general, I think beef demand took a hit in 2016. Going into 2017, it's going to be important to monitor. Circling back to why I'm actually at this meeting is hopefully we have some new ways to measure that are specific to the retail shelf. I won't belabor that for this segment, but let's look for that going forward is what I would tell producers. But more broadly, I would encourage producers to recognize that it's not just the supply, not just the calf crop that's impacting prices, but also consumer demand. Sometimes we lose sight of that, but the consumer demand drives how much value basically the beef industry has to work with, the total amount of consumer dollars that are subsequently shared, and we have to keep sight of that. And sometimes we lose sight of it, and we particularly lost sight of it in recent years when we had a tight supply story, and that's all we talked about.
Right. Well, thank you for being with us here in Nashville and certainly joining us here on Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, there you go, Kevin Glenn Tonser with Kansas State University and their economic department. As always, providing some very useful information for cattlemen and cattlewomen across the nation.